So the point is to explain why, based on the teaching of Rabbi Levi, we're answering the question why the lishka of the Kohen Gadol is lishkas ha'etz, is made of wood. On the other hand, it has to be covered. So explained, because the inyan of eitz is arichas yomim. The inyan of eitz is chesed, yamin, Kohen Gadol, and for all the reasons he explained, the association with the Kohen Gadol. On the other hand, the ikar avodah of Rosh Hashanah, of Yom Kippur, this is what the essence of it all is going to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, is all about tshuva. And that's the opposite of the eitz. The eitz is Davidis et Tzadikim. Eitz is progression, and tshuva is radical change. It's a kind of death. What was is over and something novel. It's the opposite of the eitz. But you need both, because on the one hand, on one level, there's two levels to the eitz. One level is the very simple thing, arichas yomim and broch and chesed. That's the number one request that we want to be elicited Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. But there, and that's not one level. The other level is that it expresses avodas tzadikim, which is progression and longevity. On the other hand, it's covered because the ikir inyan of, however, that's kind of the context. You need bracha and long life and panos and everything to be able to serve Hashem as one should. But what is the actual avodah? It's not the eitz. The actual avodah, it's got to be covered. The actual avodah is tshuva, and that's radical change. And hence explained why the clothing of the Kohen Gadol can't be used again, because the levushim, which contributes to his whole identity, bringing him koved and tiferes, as he quoted, that is not the same person. So that's the answer why parhedrin is actually a maila, because parhedrin means the changeover. And he explained also parhedrin, par, har, and din. Each of these three words convey the notion of gevura, as we explained yesterday, that the whole avodah of the Baal Tshuva is gevura on so many levels. It's melamat l'mayla. He has to be very disciplined, because he's tasted ra, so he needs more borders and boundaries than the tzaddik needs. Smoil doicha, the Rebbe explained, he is in a state where he's humbling himself, he's rejecting himself, as it were, his ego, that is, and he feels the pain over his distance that he once was from Malikus. That's all par, har, and din. It's all din. It's all parhedrin. So that's another dimension to parhedrin, the idea of radical change, and it's also associated with gevura. Right? Now up to V'yum tuk bazeh, kuf ayin daled. V'yum tuk bazeh, with all of the above, it'll become sweet, literally become very understood with great precision. It's called sweetness. In other words, it's not an answer to a problem, but by having this insight, we have an understanding of something which you wouldn't have noted even before, and that is Moishe Rabbeinu Kodesh, the Rabbeinu Kodesh, the redactor of the Mishnah, Kosev Eshnei Hashemes, the two names for this sweet. B'mishnah is dafke b'ofen zeh. How does he write them? So first we noted earlier, he writes them both because both properties are part of what the Kohen Gadol's avodah is. It's both eitz, arichas yomim, avodas tzadikim, and it's also parhedrin, tshuva. But now he's going to point out, where do these two names appear? Lishkas eitz appears with Masechta Midas, in Tractate Midas, which deals with the measures of the Beis Hamikdash. Vashem lishkas parhedrin Masechta Yuma, and parhedrin appears in Yuma. They're both italicized because because the difference between these two very mesechtes reflect the difference between the avodah of tzaddikim and avodah of tshuva, and accordingly, therefore, as he's going to explain that Masechta Midas, it's called Lishkas Ha'etz. That's Avodas Tzadikim. Masechta Yom, which is Yom Kippur, Tshuva, it's called Lishkas Parhedrin. How so? He goes on to explain. It's Teichna Shel Masechta Midas. The whole content of Masechta Midas, Yesh Le'Shaychas L'Avodas Tzadikim. It's obviously connected to Tzadikim, because what does Midas mean? Midas means measures, and the Avodah Tzadikim is a measured Avodah. Like my father explains, says the Rebbe Rabbi Mesechta Midas. First of all, in track the content, Mesechta Midas, actually the point I just said now is coming in the square brackets. It's a different point now. This is something that Rabbi himself says explicitly, and the Rebbe adds the nuance in the square brackets. But he says there that Mesechta Midas, Meiri talks about Eichnivna Bai Sheni B'Tchila. Mesechta Midas is talking about describing how the second base Midrash was at the outset, before this corruption set in, before the descent. And that's what tzaddikim. B'Tchila Bai Sheni, the beginning of the Bai Sheni, the Konim Tzaddikim. So that's why there it's called Takalish Kasa'etz. But Masechta Yom, which talks about generically Yom Kippur, there it's called Parhedrin. Yom is not associated with a particular time. Masechta Midas is describing a specific time in history. And what's that? When people were good. Hence, it's not called the Parhedrin. Then the Rebbe adds the point I was just saying. The Rebbe suggests, because the next point we're going to say now is so obvious, my father did not spell it out, and that is Asher Tevis Midas, the very word Midas, measures. Miloshin Midah means a measure. And that's the whole content of the Masechta. Measures and that's the tzaddik. And this is the symbol for the avodah of tzaddikim, which is a measured ascent. One level, he said earlier, Michayil El Choyil, from strength or from koyach to koyach, even though he takes great leaps, but all the leaps are based on the previous attained level. It's exactly what midas means, one measure, one grade after the other. Moreover, Omna Chazal, another indication that Masechta Midas symbolizes the avodah of tzaddikim. Chazal say, Man Tanem Midas, who is the author of Masechta Midas? And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. And who is he? Shem Mishnasei, elsewhere we learn about him that his teachings are unique in that they are kav v'noki, measured and clean. Again, the idea of cleanliness and purity and measure, that's all the avodah of what? Tzaddikim. Shezel b'dukmas avodah tzaddikim, that is symbolic and reflection of the avodah of tzaddikim. Shavidosam bin yonei oir, their whole avodah is in kedusha, kav v'noki, measured and clean, pure. Bilishum taruv v'shal choshech, without mixing any darkness. The Baal Tshuva, his avodah is to transform darkness, but the avodah of the tzaddik is to increase in light, and that's exactly what's expressed by Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. So these 2 points: A, the very word midas. That's like 3 things now. When it was made, beginning of Bayis Sheni, there were tzaddikim. The meaning of the word midas, and the author of Masechta Midas. Mashenke Masechta Yuma, and not much has to be said about this because this is very straightforward. Yuma, which means the day, referring to Yom Kippur, Teichon Avedis Yom Kippurim. That's Yuma talks about what? Yom Kippurim, which is Avedis HaTshuva, which is Tshuva, and hence in Masechta Yuma, that's where it's called what? Parhedrin, because Parhedrin means change, radical change in Tshuva. Very beautiful. Oistes. So that now he spells out the conundrum here. On the one hand, Lishkas Ha'etz, on the other hand, covered. Pikol Anal, in light of everything we explained now, Yuvan Gam Hatam will understand the reason Sha'esh B'Liskas HaKohen Gadol, that the wood it could not be exposed, but had to be covered. That was the question originally. Rabbi Levi explained to us why Dafke, the Lishka, was made of eight, because that's the unit of Chesed and Arichas Yomim, so why have it covered? So now we have the answer. Chidush Avodah is Kohen Gadol b'Yom Kippurim, because the main Chidush of the Avodah of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur einay ha'inyan shel Avodah Tzadikim. It's not Avodah Tzadikim. That's not the inyan of Yom Kippur. Ela Tshuva shebezeh mudagesh, because it's underscores lo inyan shel Arichas Yomim. So the overarching emphasis is not the idea of longevity in that sense of a measured increase. Ella, the movement Muslim in a certain sense, lahipach, it's the opposite theme that we want, and that is zeh shonas mitzias chadosha and new mitzias. It's an interesting to note also that the Kohen Gadol, Yom Kippur, one of the things we're not allowed to do, of course, is bathe on Yom Kippur. And the Kohen Gadol went 5 times to the mikveh on Yom Kippur. Why? Because the ultimate inyan of mikveh is rebirth. We literally return to the womb and re-emerge in new mitzias. Actually, on a more literal level, you can't survive in the water, so it's a kind of death. You disappear. You have to submerge and you're gone. And then you emerge. So he does it 5 times because it's a rebirth of every level of the neshama. Nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, even yichid. That's the ikar of Yom Kippur. A funny story, which I'm sure the Abish had a lot of hana. I'm not going to mention any names, but many years ago, here in MTC, someone was just beginning his journey in Yiddishkeit. So he started going to the mikveh. So Yom Kippur morning, he goes to the mikveh. And he was shocked that there was nobody there. Only found out later that that's a big no-no. But the truth is that they did it in all innocence, and I'm sure in heaven it was considered like the Kohen Gadol immersing on Yom Kippur. We'd have to speak this chusim of Yidden. This reminds me of walking to shul one Shabbos morning, and a neighbor who was a passionate gardener. So he's attending to his garden. And these are mamish avis melachis. He couldn't get any more straightforward transgressions of Shabbos than
planting and sowing and
every one after the other. Isure de'oraisa. Much more than driving a car, turning a light on, which yeshleima is not so pashut. Most of the things we would do on a Shabbos, which we consider transgression, this is outright. Say, Rabbi, good Shabbos, he smiles. I'm not working. This was his labor of love. He's not working. In other words, he felt, it's Shabbos, you have to say something. And I thought to myself immediately, this is how he lit up the heavens. Here the truth is, he's doing, but he was in all innocence, I'm not working. Which reminds me further, I'll tell you this also on the subject, the same thing. I mean, the truth is, I would never have such an attitude, but the Rebbe drummed this into our head. So, finally it's hopefully taken hold. But here's a classic story with the Rebbe, the famous Uriel Zimmer. Uriel Zimmer, one day will tell you his story. He was a brilliant man. He worked for the UN. He knew I don't know how many languages fluently. He's a translator. He came from Satmar background, very extreme. He wrote many, the Rebbe encouraged him. He wrote famous essays explaining why Zionism is antithetical to Yiddishkeit, even religious Zionism, maybe more so religious Zionism. And he became a Lubavitcher. He was inspired by Tuvia Bloy, a famous Yerushalmi Lubavitcher in ZT'L. He was a very big Talmid Chacham and a very big activist, very passionate man. So in the early years, a tremendous correspondence with the Rebbe also. In the early years in Yechidus, this is in the 60s, he couldn't understand. He couldn't understand how the Chabad and the Rebbe's patronizing, for want of a better word, with non-religious Jews. This was then so beyond the pale of orthodoxy. certainly of the Hasidic Haredi world. The Rebbe told him the following, he shared this later. He says, it's Yom Kippur morning, and you're an American Jew, as a member in a Reformed temple. I told you the story. He wakes up in the morning, it's Yom Kippur, he's not going to work. He shaves, not in the way Jews are allowed to shave even during the week. I think Rebbe says even he gets showered and he gets into his car and he goes to his temple and sits there for an hour or two, because Yom Kippur, he cannot imagine the tainug that he causes above in heaven for the 2 hours that he's sitting there in the synagogue, because today is Yom Kippur. It's completely blew his circuits. But that's a view of, that's the divine view, that's the Eibishter talking. That's Atzmus Mahus talking about a Yid, which the Baal Shem Tov revealed and Chassidus revealed. How do we get into all of that? The mikveh and Yom Kippur. Elosh Afal Pikein. Now, the question that David Azulai asked yesterday, so having said all that we did now, so why only does the name Parhedrin only emerge at this point in history, at the time when of the great decline, the spiritual decline? You explain now the tremendous maila of Chiddush and Mitzias Chadosha and new entity and Tshuva, and that's why it has to be covered, and Gevura, the avodah of Bali Tshuva. Yeah? So he answers now, Shafa Piken, is Chadish Hashem Parhedrin. This name Parhedrin only became Rak La'achli Shoyakanim Gedolim Shoyu Shaloi Kidibai. This only happened once the Kohanim Gedolim were not the way they were supposed to be. Why? Calls man Kohanim Gedolim Hayit Tzadikim. During the period when they were Tzadikim Tzadzeh, because Sheklol Sadeiroi Bedarka Tzadikim, they're a reflection of the general generation. In footnote 59, let's look at it. See earlier at length, Sheklolos in general, Chiluk Ben Bais Rishon or Bais Sheni, the difference between the first Bais and the second, well, Kachiluk Ben Avedes Tzadikim Avedes Bali Tshuva, as explained at length in that Sikha. So that's true, the first Beis Hamikdash, and for the first part at least of the second. So therefore what? Even though always the avodah of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur is what? Avodas HaTshuva. Become Malkoim Be'iker, here's the point here. Up until this period of decline, where outright sin, till then, Be'iker Zeh Inyan Shal Tshuva Tzadikim. What kind of tshuva? The tshuva of tzaddikim. And the tshuva of tzaddikim, it's taka tshuva, but it's not radical. Because what he's doing till now is good. So it's in good itself, radical change. But that's not as radical as going from sin from darkness to light. In brackets, Kiddush, it's known, it's one of the big Chidushim he's saying now, of the Alter Rebbe, Tshuva is not only for sins. As we learn in the Geras HaTshuva, in the Kotet Torah, this is Tshuva Ilah. It's from the distance from Hashem that happens, not only because of sin. Because the neshama is descended into the body. And this kind of tshuva, which means return, to return the neshama to its pristine state before descending into the body, Higam bet tzadikim is also bet tzadikim. So therefore, it wasn't called Parhedrin in the early years because the radical component didn't really emerge till it was necessary, and that's when there was outright sin. Now, just to remind you again of what is meant by the tshuva of tzadikim. So there's a beautiful illustration for this, which I read in the complete story of Tishrei. This is a book, if you haven't read, you should. It was made for children in the 60s. Chabad, one of the Chabad library of books for children. And it goes through the whole Tishrei, and it's very basic of the whole story and the basic halachas and Midrash Chazal. And beautifully, there's very deep teachings there too, conveyed in a way that a child can understand. Now this story, which I'm going to tell you, is in that book, and it conveys this. What does it mean that the Tzaddik does tshuva. Improve, we understand, but tshuva is some element of regret. So how can there be regret in things he did well? If we're saying do more, okay. We're not saying that. The tshuva is the avodah for the tzaddik, and always was. It's not radical, but still tshuva. So where is the regret? So you know the story. I'll start saying it, you remember. Rabbi Sadia Gaon. No, said his name's now I remember. Rabbi Sadia Gaon, one of the greatest luminaries in our history, lived before the Rambam, from the period of the Gaonim. He wrote many svarim, very many popular svarim to this day. So Rabbi Sadia Gaon, the story goes, was once traveling, and he arrived in the evening in the town, and he went to the inn owned by a Jewish fella. Fine. Who didn't know he was Rabbi Sadia Gaon. And he directs him to his room. The next morning, people come from near and far all day to receive his counsel, his advice, his bracha. The innkeeper realized that the guest was none other than the great Rabbi Sadia Gaon. So he fell at his feet, begging for forgiveness. Rebbe, forgive me. So Rabbi Sadia Gaon lifts him up, my good man, he kisses him on his forehead. What are you asking forgiveness? He says, Rebbe, the way I received you last night. The rabbi says, everything was in perfect order. There's nothing for you to apologize for. I said, the innkeeper, tears streaming down his cheeks. But if I'd have known it was you, it would be completely different. It's a beautiful, beautiful illustration of the tshuva in mitzvahs. As the tzaddik's appreciation of the Eibishter's blikvul, and the Eibishter's gifts and so on, and the tzaddik's ascent to ever higher levels, that demands a transformation of the mitzvahs that I did. So there's a regret. There's this element of regret. A healthy regret. Now that I appreciate you so much more, so even my gestures, my good has to be transformed. And that's how it should be in a marriage. As the Eibishter blesses us and we live together and so on, and we appreciate more and more the gift that we have. So even being a good husband, that I was till now, that was good in the immature early days, before I really appreciated what it means to have a wife and a family and all that you do. And now that with each passing day, and I realize, because I'm honest and objective of how much I'm indebted to you, so then even his being good, the good stuff that he was doing, that becomes transformed. But still it's subtle. It's not parhedrin. It's not going from chayshich to oir. It's in oir gufa, a radical change. So there was always the avodah of tshuva. However, umayacher and sins, continuing the point. Shebetzadikim le nimtze ingen hayitzia va'abrecha, but the tzaddik is not running away, fleeing. Yitzia means leaving, and brecha means to flee. Me'eretz tzia v'tzamavas retired. Tzamavas means shadow of death. He's not coming from a place of death, of sin and transgression, of violation, of betrayal. So therefore, l'chein einat tzimoin shalahem. In his tshuva, it's not this passionate, desperate tshuva. But tshuva shel tzaddik in the tshuva. Im toike v'chayzik, with this intensity and strength, shturim in Yiddish, storm, kazeh, like the literal Baal Tshuva has. Shulamaylim medidav akbala, that Baal Tshuva is breaking, literally breaking molds, lagambri completely. It's a subtle, tshuva. But it's not the radical tshuva. High time, but that's the reason, therefore, that Shema Lishka Oz Haya Lishka Sa'etz. It wasn't called Pahadin then, but for centuries it was called Lishka Sa'etz, reflective of the nature of the tshuva at that time. It was still covered always, because we're talking change. But the name remained Lishka Sa'etz, which is symbolic of the tzaddik and the tzaddik's tshuva. It had to be covered because that's not, it isn't about tweaking, it's about changing. Good. But the change is not radical. It doesn't warrant the name Parhedrin. It's not like you don't recognize the person, the next day. But tshuva, you don't recognize him. You, hello, whoa. Didn't recognize you for a moment, not just because he grew a beard. It's his whole demeanor is transformed. You're not going to see that in the tzaddik. Dafke, as he concludes, Bazman shakin godel shekahanim gedolim hoya einam ksherim. So Dafke, this is how the Rebbe concludes, beautifully, that the Yerida becomes the very seed for the greatest Aliyah. So it's Dafke when they weren't where they're supposed to be. They were reflective of the general the matzav of the generation. So then so then they changed the name, and the message to the Kohen Gadol is for him personally, and what he has to inspire in his whole generation. Lifel ba'adoir, to effect in the whole generation, is tshuva kipshuta, literal tshuva and literal transformation, which, as we learned elsewhere, Chassidus reaches the highest depths. Tshuva zu, this tshuva, dafke, this radical change, this brings a Jew, lifts him from all limitations. It makes him an entirely new entity. And as we learn in Chassidus, the paradox that the low level of tshuva, which is what this one is pasha changing destructive behavior, has a mile even of a tshuva ilah, the tshuva of the tzaddik. In many ways, and first and foremost, that it's pahedrin, he's a new person. That's a tremendous tainug and pleasure and nachas ruach that a yid causes the Eibishter. The Batshuva, literal Batshuva, causes a greater tainug because of the greater change, the greater the novelty, and it's also more difficult. It's one thing, you're dedicated to what's right and you want to do more, appreciate more. But to go from one world to another requires much greater discipline and change, and therefore it reaches deeper in the neshama and causes greater tainug, and therefore the end dafka of Bayesheni, it's called Pahedin. The Shaila will be when Mashiach will come. What is it going to be called then? Is it going to be called Lishkas Ha'etz or Parhedrin? That will be a nice thing to be on the lookout for, friends, when it happens. Okay, now an overview of this beautiful Sikha. The Sikha begins with the Machlekas of the Rambam and the Ravid. The Rambam says that you can't use eitz anywhere in the complex of the Beis Hamikdash. The Ravid argues and says there was the lishka of the Kohen Gadol, and then there was the balconies and sukkahs. Therefore, he argues with the Rambam and says that the whole Isam B'Darabanan, which is all based on the Isam and HaTorah, that not to plant a tree anywhere near the Mizbeach, says the Ravid, it's not only near the Mizbeach, only in the Ezras Kohanim. But the Rambam holds otherwise and holds that it applies everywhere. So we have to now answer the Rambam. If you hold it applies everywhere, the Rambam's protest, how you can answer his kasha about the Lishkas Ha'etz and the balconies made on sukkahs. What's the answer? The balconies on sukkahs is an easy answer because they're what? They're temporary, so that doesn't represent a problem. As for Lishkas Ha'etz, they're covered. So then the Rebbe asks, so why cover it? Exposed. So some Mepharshim give an answer, why is it covered? In order to contribute to the humbling of the Kohen Gadol. You want him to be humble, he shouldn't take his position, what's the expression for it? He shouldn't become kaponim, he shouldn't breed arrogance. And that's the reason we explained why the very position, the location, the Lishkas Ha'etz, was dafka very far from where he did the actual avodah. He had to traverse the whole width from north to south several times in Yom Kippur. So they want to say that's the same reason why they would make it of wood and not stone. So the Rebbe rejects that. Why? Because how far do we have to go to humble the Kohen Gadol? Enough already. The fact that we made it already over there is enough. It's an unsavory thing. We're worried about his arrogance. We have to publicize that and make it, and actually change the building materials in the Beis Hamikdash. It's a very drastic step, and it's already been achieved by its very location. There's no need to go further. The fact that it's there is already. So you have to add on top of that, and then we can also make it out of wood. Nothing's achieved. The location's already there. Message is being conveyed. So we must say, therefore, there's a mile dafka in making it out of eitz. And the other hand's got to be covered. And that's when he brings in Rabbi Levi. What's the mile of eitz? Because eitz is the symbol of. Where's the source for that? Aside from the Gashmitic fact, as you pointed out, that it's the oldest living organism in existence. It's a pasuk in Yeshaya. Ki yemei ha'etz yemei ami. It's talking about Yemei Mashiach, the longevity of the Jewish people. And therefore, we want the dafka to be lishkas ha'etz because Kohen Gadol is his whole inyan is chesed, is arichas yomim, is being mamshich arichas yomim for Yidden. Chesed roya yemina. Where else do we see the connection, the association between the Kohen Gadol and arichas yomim? Yaron, yeah, Dari Miklat. That he has to stay in the Arim Miklat till the Kohen Gadol dies. And the reason, Rashi says, because he shortened the life of a person. And it's unbefitting, and the Kohen Gadol is all about bringing blessing for Arichas Yom, so it's unfitting, they should be in the same space. So we see in Halacha, in Pasuk, Halacha Kipshuta, that the Kohen Gadol is in Yonah, is what? Arichas Yomim. So we dafke one lishkas ha'etz. On the other hand, it's got to be covered to respect the din that you can't, the Issa Derabanan, as a fence around the prohibition of planting leisita called eitz on Mizbach Hashem Balikecha. Therefore, we have to cover it. But the Rebbe asks, Akapane bepnimis ein yonim. Why shouldn't this be the exception to begin with? The lishkas eitz should be the exception. This one should be exposed because of the virtue of eitz. You have many exceptions in Torah. Starting with, you're not allowed to cook on Shabbos. There's a huge exception to that in our context here. Cook, broil, light fires. Beis HaMikdash, the Karbanos. The Torah is full of exceptions, as in the first place, appropriate exceptions. So why should this be one? The whole Beis HaMikdash has to be, and certainly, when the Chachamim made the Gzeira, and they made a Gzeira to protect the Isur of planting a tree because of the Maila of the eitz and the Kohen Gadol, Chatchila say no wood anywhere except here. Why did they make a blanket prohibition? So you have to say this with the Pnimis and Yonim, taka both in Yonim. You have to have the eitz, has to be covered. How do you understand this? So here the Beis Sikh introduced the whole inyan of what the Parhedrin. Both the Rebbe Shailis on. First of all, Rabbi Levi said, when did the name Parhedrin start? After the passing of Shimon HaTzadik, when there was what? The decline and corruption. The Kohanim Gedolim bought their position with money. So why were they called Parhedrin? Parhedrin means... Parhedrin, what is it? Just the word Parhedrin means, its translation?
Change.
No. Officer. Parhedrin means officer. Period. Now the officers were changed every 12 months. For the reason we explained, right? Because the king wants to keep everybody at bay. So it was a sad commentary on the Maimed Matzev that the Kohanim Gedolim were not tzaddikim, and therefore either they died then and there or they died in the course of a year. And very often there was what? A changeover of Kohanim Gedolim. Therefore it was called Parhedrin. The Rebbe has 3 protests against Gewalt Eitochen. What are the 3 kashas? How could this be? That's a fact. It's a mitzias, but he's asking on it. What's the kasha? 3 kashas. Even without learning the sikh, you would ask it. Just like, what?
So why are we publicizing?
Why are we enshrining this? Bad enough that it happens. You have to make it now or to change the name. Secondly, not every Kohen Gadol, even towards the end of the Bai Sheni, was corrupt. Many of them served for decades. So why would they suffer the stigma of being in a suite that is called Parhedrin, where they were there year after year, and tzaddikim. And thirdly, maybe the strongest kasha. Hint, timing, time of year. So when is he in the Lishkas Eitz, the Kohen Gadol? When was he there? Why was he? Huh? He's only there for 1 week, for 10 days. He has to make tshuva. So what's the kasha? That's the whole. Explain why he was there in order to be avoid tumah, in order to be instructed in the Avodah of Yom Kippurim. So the question is, we're approaching Rosh Hashanah Kippur, Yom Adin. You want to be very careful about not invoking the opposite of schusim. You want the merits, and here's a big announcement: Parhedrin. When Yom Kippur, that's when it's used. Hayitochen. So therefore, we must say that Adarab is a big mile in Parhedrin. So that began the whole beer, which we'll just conclude quickly tomorrow and start the new Maimer. Be'ez Hashem.